Hello and welcome to this week's negotiation nugget. This week I'm going to be talking about 5 key things to get curious about when you are negotiating internally. Now, if you work for a support function within a large corporate such as procurement and finance, it's likely that your internal stakeholders are going to want to see evidence of your ability to negotiate effectively with them before they would trust you negotiating externally on behalf of them with vendors and suppliers. So in this 10 to 15 minute max negotiation nugget, I'm going to take you through 5 key things that I want you to consider or think about when you are next engaging with a key internal stakeholder that you are looking to demonstrate your effective negotiation skills with, so that they can ultimately invite you in to help you develop and negotiate externally with core suppliers externally. So I'm just going to bring up a small one sheet presentation slide. The first one I want to talk about is interests and goals. Now, say for example, you're a procurement team member and you're looking to develop relationships internally with, say, the IT department. Wanting to understand what their core motivations are is going to be critical to understand where you have alignment of objectives with them, where their objectives align both internally within their own function, but also against the greater business objectives. Likely, if you're negotiating on their behalf for a potential future IT system, you're going to have other parties such as finance also involved in the negotiation. So understanding what the interests are of both the IT department, of the finance department, understanding what their individual motivations are, can allow you then to understand whether or not internally the objectives are aligned before you start negotiating externally with any potential provider of any IT system or technology. By understanding what the interests and goals are of each of those departments that are going to be involved in the negotiation, you can start to evaluate where there is common ground, identify where objectives are aligned, but also, more importantly, identify where objectives are misaligned, so that those areas of misalignment can be addressed internally first before you go out to market to negotiate or invite opportunities for request for tenders to various suppliers. So understanding where the common ground exists is important and critical to identify that internal alignment. But in doing so, what you're then able to do is identify where those objectives are important and therefore where the potential trade-offs are going to be. So what are the non-negotiables, and therefore what are the trade-offs that you are willing to negotiate on, or what they are willing to negotiate on, so that you can align a strategy towards that. Without understanding the interests and goals of your internal stakeholder, you're going to be left to the mercy of what any potential vendor might tell you about what their systems and performance can be, or what their product or service can do. And what you want is to be able to marry that understanding from the external environment by really priming and positioning internally what is important first and foremost. Secondly, when you're negotiating internally first, and something to get curious about is, what are the constraints and priorities of your internal stakeholders? What limitations do they have? Do they have budget constraints? Do they have time constraints? Do they have resource constraints? By understanding the limitations faced by your internal stakeholders, one, you're demonstrating an ability to get into their world and imagine the frustrations or the discomfort or any pain points that they have that might limit their ability to get the best solution. Secondly, when you can understand what their challenges and frustrations and concerns are, as well as their priorities, you're able to better position a solution that addresses those concerns. So recognizing that without understanding someone else's constraints and priorities, any solution that you can present would only come from your perspective and lens of the world. And ultimately, if you want to be effective in your negotiation capability with your internal stakeholders, you have to be able to get into their world, look at the world through their lens. What are they seeing? What are they not seeing? And it may be that the solutions, therefore, that you propose actually can highlight their constraints are not actually a constraint, but instead something as an opportunity to be created. So understanding constraints and priorities is going to be critical to help you develop solutions that stakeholders are going to be more engaged in, and ultimately keep you aligned to the business parameters for constraints to drive a solution that meets those. The third thing I want you to consider when you are negotiating internally is to get curious about the communication style of your counterparties. Now, it's too easy to communicate in the way that we like to communicate outwards and assume that everyone wants to be communicated to in the same way. But consider your audience, an IT team or a finance team, if you're a procurement team negotiating with them. In what way are they typically more comfortable communicating? Do they want to be interrupted at their desks, or would they like to have an invitation and request by email first prior to booking in some time for a conversation? Are they okay to be interrupted, or actually do they need to carve out time in their day or the weeks in advance so that they can prepare in advance for the information that you need and the content that's required to help you be able to do your job more effectively? Understanding your stakeholders' communication style, one, allows you to eliminate any friction that they might experience in the interaction with you. So if you are a high-level strategy-focused individual that wants to talk big picture, but your stakeholder wants detailed information and is data-oriented, talking big picture thinking and energizing them with this great idea of the vision that you have isn't going to inspire or connect with them if they're actually looking for something with more substance and depth and want data to be able to evaluate before they have the dialogue. So thinking about what is the communication style of your counterparty, how can you eliminate friction for them, i.e. make it easy to interact with you? How can they digest information in the most easy way for them because you've taken the time to consider their needs and eliminate friction in their world? By eliminating friction in their world and organizing information in a way that they are ready to receive it, what you end up doing is building rapport. That demonstration of rapport then means that you build trust, and longer term, you're invited to have a seat at the table in advance of them embarking on any new project, rather than you trying to position yourself in late in the day where it's too late to influence negotiation outcomes with vendors and suppliers. But by getting in and building rapport with your internal stakeholders in advance, you actually arrive at the table early enough to make the impact and the difference that you can make. The fourth thing I want you to think about is organizational dynamics. So what are the power dynamics within the business? Where is the decisions that are pertinent to this particular negotiation going to be made? What's the process for decision making? And are there any particular political influences that exist in each of those functions? Now, in large corporates, politics are often inevitable, and certain functions and team members or certain individuals have power or influence or the opportunity to direct a course of action based on their decision-making hierarchy. So understanding who's who in the zoo, who's the decision maker, who's going to influence the outcome for your key stakeholders, who do they care about the most, who are they worried about the most. Understanding that, again, will help you develop solutions and align your negotiation strategy to the dynamics within the organization. So, for example, if you're trying to influence the CFO and you identify the person that the CFO looks to is their right-hand person, the head of finance control, you might have the opportunity to build that rapport and that relationship with the head of finance control, knowing that the CFO is going to be seeking their guidance, insights, and understanding about the value proposition from someone they trust. So learning how to influence the person they trust first can then make the conversation with the CFO a lot easier if that dialogue has already happened between those two parties that you have influenced. So understanding the dynamics within the organization is again critical for you to make a true impact in your role and the value that you bring. The final one that I want to share with you is alternatives and NBOs, next best options, also known as BATNAs, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If you want to influence your stakeholders more effectively, you need to understand what are their next best options to deal with someone else versus dealing with you. So where alternative sources of solutions exist is important to understand. If the next best option is them doing nothing, then to have to deal with an internal procurement team going through a detailed process for purchasing is more attractive. How can you make it more attractive to deal with you then, to avoid making decisions for the business that are ultimately going to grow it? So look at the attractiveness of the options and alternatives to your stakeholders. In what way would they be better encouraged to work with you than to work against you? By understanding and addressing their needs and highlighting, therefore, the benefits of working with you, and any proposal is going to be far more effective for the organization to get the value that they can extract by leveraging your skill set than if you hadn't understood what was most attractive and what was the next best option for the stakeholder that you're engaging in. By understanding these 5 key areas and getting curious about them, interests and goals, constraints and priorities, communication style, organizational dynamics, as well as alternatives and next best options, you'll put yourself in a situation where negotiating internally is going to be far more effective for you, which then demonstrates trust, credibility for you to then demonstrate those skills externally. Too often it's easy for us to focus on the external vendors and suppliers we're going to be negotiating with. But if you don't master your negotiation skills internally, why should your stakeholders trust you to be able to do the best job on their behalf for them externally? So have a think about that when you are next negotiating with an internal stakeholder. If you've got any questions, or if there's any topic that you would like me to address in a future negotiation nugget, please don't hesitate to reach out, drop me a line directly, and I'd be happy to share and talk further. Thanks very much, and thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of the week. And I will be back again with another negotiation nugget in a week.